books in inside upside down. Boy, you turn me inside out. Round, round. Hello and welcome to yet another video. Today we are doing one that honestly I'm really looking forward to, and I've actually planned this one. I've thought about it. I put thought into it. I did research. The only research I did was looking on my bookshelves, but still, this is also a video that I love watching, so I'm so happy to be making my own. So yes, as you guessed it from the thumbnail or the title of the video, today I am doing a fantasy reading guide full with a lot of book recs. I don't know how many, a good 20 plus book recs. What more could you ask for? But yeah, so today I'm going to be sitting here and talking to you guys about the different subgenres of fantasy and then giving you book recommendations that fit into each of these subgenres. We have a mix of duologies, standalones, trilogies, series, but yeah, we have a lot of books to get through. I've literally got like multiple piles on the floor in front of me. You can't see them because they're by my feet, but they're there. And so we have a lot to get through, so I'm not going to bore you too much yapping at first. I think we should just jump straight into it. So grab yourself a nice cold glass of water or a warm drink depending on your preference, and let's get right on into the video. So I have been reading fantasy since I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I think I'm a very qualified person to talk about this. I've literally been reading fantasy for 10 plus years, so I know what I'm talking about, and I read fantasy in literally all of the subgenres. I've read hundreds and hundreds of fantasy books. I definitely know what I'm on about. So the subgenres that we are going to be seeing today, we're going to be seeing romantasy, high fantasy slash epic fantasy, dark academia slash academia, urban fantasy, YA fantasy, magical realism, interconnected series. Technically interconnected series is obviously a subgenre, but it's just one of my personal favorite things in fantasy is interconnected series, and so I want to talk about it. This is my channel, I make the rules. So first off, romantasy. I'm sure that if you've been on BookTok, you have heard the word romantasy used, and most books on BookTok, most fantasy books on BookTok, they all are mainly romantasy. Basically, romantasy for me, I know some people have slightly varying opinions on it. It's one of those ones that is not quite concrete in the public opinion, but for me personally, romantasy is when you have 50-50 romance and fantasy elements in a book. So basically the way I picture that is if you took out the romance from a book, the story and the plot line would not be as good, and same if you took out the fantasy, the story and the plot line would not be as good. So you need them both to work. That is what romantasy is for me. So I have here 3 examples of romantasy books. I'm not gonna lie to you, all of these I did like discover myself from TikTok, but that's just because before TikTok, romantasy just wasn't the main genre I read. So all the romantasy books that I read, I have found on TikTok. You couldn't do a video where you're talking about romantasy books, you talk about fantasy genres, and not mention Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing is the BookTok romantasy book, and there is honestly a reason it is that good. I'm sure all of you here have seen of Fourth Wing, but basically this follows Violet Sorrengail as she joins Basgiath War College, which is basically where you learn to be a dragon rider. So in this first book you follow her through her first year of training, but obviously as the case is, it's not just following her through her first year, you also learn that there's some kind of government plot going on, you know. It's literally, I feel like every fantasy book you kind of have that. It might originally be just going to school, learning things, but then it just so happens that during my year of school, everything starts going to shit in the world. That's just how it is. This book also has Zayden Ryerson, and there is a reason that Zayden Ryerson is TikTok's #1 book boyfriend. You have to read this book to find out, but let me just tell you, people aren't lying about how good this book is. The next one is another BookTok one, although this one I have seen less, and that is Guild by Raven Kennedy. This is the first book in a 6-book series. I myself have only read the first 3 books, but I do need to continue. I do plan on continuing that this year, hopefully. And basically this is a King Midas retelling. So you follow Auron, who is the girl that King Midas touched and turned to gold, and she was in poverty before, so he kind of also saved her from poverty, and now he keeps her in his castle in a gold cage. And it's a really, really big cage, but it's still a cage. And basically throughout this story, at least the 3 I've read, it is about Auron kind of realizing that life in a cage is no life, and that love that keeps you trapped in a cage is also not real love, and coming into her own and becoming a lot stronger. And I will say this first book is a bit slow, and the main character is a bit naive, a bit weak, but the character growth of this character, and also just the story growth, it gets so much better. Already just from book 1 to book 2, it is 10 times better, and the same book 2 to 3, so I can only imagine that the end of the series just gets better and better. And we then have A Fate Inked in Blood by Daniel L. Jensen. I only just read this last month. This is the first book in a duology. I read both books in February, and I really enjoyed them. I know a lot of people say the second one isn't as good. I personally found that they were both equally good. So in this book you follow Freya as it is discovered that she was prophesized about as the person who was going to unite Skarland, so the country in this, under one ruler. And so basically the king finds out that she's the person of prophecy and makes her marry him because he wants to be the ruler of Skarland. Like, he's a small king and he wants to be high king, if that makes sense. Over the course of this book, basically Freya kind of comes into the realization that she controls her own fate. Not some man, she controls her own fate and she doesn't have to do what this man tells her. And this is Viking inspired and I love that. I need to read more Viking inspired fantasy. It is honestly niche. I think it's underrated. Yeah, like I said, this is a duology, so this is quick and easy to read. Very enjoyable, very fast-paced, very action-packed, entertaining. I also absolutely love the romance in this one, because obviously these romantic books, the romance is important. This romance is between Bjorn and Freya. So Bjorn is the king's son, and he is basically trying the whole time to just get Freya to realize that she controls her own fate, and he is fighting against his father who's trying to control Freya. And I just love that. I love me when a man is doing everything for the woman to live her best life. Okay, so that's all the romance that we have. Next off we have high fantasy. So high fantasy is my personal favourite subgenre of fantasy and the one that I read the most books in. Lord of the Rings is very much the epitome of this subcategory. Basically high fantasy, or epic fantasy as it's often known, is going to be very political. Oftentimes you'll have a king or a queen, you know, there'll be a court, there'll probably be some wars going on. Very large scale books with big world building, characters. It's just really well developed and very epic. The name works for what it is. So I have 3 books suggestions here, all part of series, because I feel like it would be hard to try to high fantasy or an epic fantasy in a standalone. Like, it can be done, but it just wouldn't be the same because the world building, because they're so expansive stories, it's better to get spread out over a series. So the first one, and all of these series are god tier series for me, but then again it is my favourite subgenre, so it makes sense. But the first one we're talking about is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I absolutely loved this series. It is goated. 6 stars every book. The last book destroyed me, but in the best way possible. In this book we follow Nari, who is a con artist living in Cairo, and she accidentally summons a 1,000-year-old Jinn, and then she gets swept away into the world of Daevabad and discovers all the Jinn, all the magic, her place in this new world that she's discovered. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I would say this one is very politically focused, and the characters in this book are so important. The character really what makes this book amazing, because the story itself is already 5 stars, but it's the characters that really take it above and beyond, and the relationships between these characters as well. Another god tier trilogy, and that is the Imperium trilogy. So this is book 1, Furyborn by Claire Legrand. This trilogy, I have no words. I read this last February, so a year ago now, and I still think it is one of my favourite books that I have read in the past year. And I read it literally a year ago. Since then, I have not read anything better. I've read things equally as good, but nothing better. This is yet another trilogy where the last book destroyed me. I think that is a common high fantasy trait, is often the last book will be really devastating just because of the scale of it and the type of story it is, but that's also why I love them. So in this we follow Eliana and Riel, who are each set 1,000 years apart. So like Riel is 1,000 years behind Eliana, if that makes sense. They are both prophesized about, and through the course of this book we basically find out why they're prophesized about, how they're connected, or what's going on. This book, I think the best thing about it is it's unexpected, because a lot of fantasy books sometimes not necessarily fall victim to tropes, but just because there are kind of accepted tropes within the genre or plot points that are quite common and pop up in a lot of books. Sometimes you'll read a book and it will still be really fun and enjoyable, but you do kind of see where the plot's going, or it's hard for that book to surprise you. This book series, I have no words. I was blown away, but in the best way possible. And then the last book that I have for epic / high fantasy is Throne of Glass. I'm sure you've heard of Throne of Glass. This is an 8-book series, so it is quite a lot, and the last book is like 1,000 pages, so it is a bit of a commitment, but it's 100% worth it, because the world building, the magic system, the cast of characters, the relationships, the character development, everything about this book is just top tier, perfectly done. So this first book we follow Selena Sardothian, who is an assassin who got caught and is in prison, and then the prince of the country comes and wants her to be his champion in an upcoming tournament. And throughout this book we discover that someone's actually trying to sabotage the tournament, and we have to find out why. And the first book is quite like small scale, like it's really kind of just the main focus is the tournament, and we don't get a lot more. But then as the books go on, each becomes a little bit larger scale and gives us a little bit more information about like the overall plot line, just up until the last book where it's like it all explodes. And I really like that because it also kind of eases you into the story. You're not straight off the bat getting something full on war, politics. You're kind of starting in easy and then it grows as you yourself grow within this world. Okay, so the next genre that we have is dark academia / academia. I myself am not really sure if there's a huge difference between dark academia and academia. I feel like all the books I have in front of me, they are academia, but they are also kind of dark. So I'm not really sure about the difference between the two. A dark academia book is pretty self-explanatory. It's a book that has academia in it. So like it's in a university setting, they're studying something, learning something. There's gonna be a lot of fancy words in it that you might not understand. But yeah, it's just a very like academic / knowledge focused plot. I have 3 examples for this, and 2 of them do come from the same author. But for me, you can't talk about dark academia without talking about this author, because they just do it so well. So the first book we have, and yes, it is by that author, is Babel by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang, for me, queen of academia. She does it so well. But yeah, so the first one I'm here to talk about is Babel. In this book we follow Robin, who is a Chinese immigrant who basically, like, when he was a child, someone from England came and like took him because his family was dead and they raised him as their own son. And he goes to Babel, which is the Oxford School of Translation. And the way the magic system in this works is that if you have a silver bar, if on one side you write like book in English and on the other side you write book in Chinese, then if you get the right mix of languages and words, you get something magical happen. So like, I don't know, maybe the book will start reading itself to me. And so obviously Babel, the translation center, is like very important in the magic system. Like every R.F. Kuang book, it's kind of like surface level one thing, but then it has social issues that is actually the main point of the story. And this one was colonialism, the way that it's really insidious to the point that you can be a victim of colonialism, like Robin, and you don't even necessarily realize it, and you will help colonialism profit off of you. It was so good. You can't read an R.F. Kuang book and not be thinking. Like, there are some books on this list that I've talked about that you can just kind of read them and it's just a fun time and you don't have to think about it. But an R.F. Kuang book, you put this book down and you'll still be thinking about it and the points that it mentioned and that it made. And this one's also set, which I find really interesting, it's set during the Chinese English like opium wars that happened in the 19th century, and that is just a period of time that I find fascinating anyway. So reading a book this good about a time that I really found really interesting was such a great experience. The next book is one of the God tier series of my like teenage years. This book was actually formative for me, and that is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I love this series, obviously. It is a trilogy, and in this trilogy you follow Elle as she is a student at the Scholomance, which is kind of like this sentient school. So it doesn't have any teachers, the school provides the classes and everything. I can't quite remember how that works, I did read this a while ago, but I remember loving the story. So like, I remember enough about it to know that I loved it. And there are only 2 ways out of this school, and that is graduate or die. And oftentimes graduation kind of leads to death as well. So I'd say this is definitely fits the dark part of dark academia, and then obviously because they're in the school, you have the academia setting. And then in book 2 and book 3, you kind of expand on the world and on the magic system, and it just gets so much bigger. I just love these books. These were another book series that kind of didn't go in the direction I was expecting, and I was pleasantly surprised by them. And then we have the next one, which is of course another R.F. Kuang book, and that is Calabasas. So this is R.F. Kuang's most recent book, and I loved it, as always. This one is a chunky boy, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not necessarily a quick read, because like I said, it's academia, so it's very thoughty. You gotta do a lot of thinking about it. But basically, this one, you follow Alice, who along with Peter, one of her classmates, they go to hell to try and bring back to life one of their professors who died, because they need him to graduate. And so already, that kind of doesn't seem academic, because it's not in school, and they're in hell, but because they're classmates, and a lot of it's almost theoretical, because they learn about how when they're in class and everything. It is dark academia, and it's done oh so well. I thought this was really new and interesting, because I've never read a book set in hell before, and I don't think, like outside of Dante's Inferno, I don't think it's necessarily a common setting for books. And like every good R.F. Kuang book, at any point during the book, do not be like unprepared. You have to read this book prepared for there to be a plot twist at 25%, at 50%, at 75%. At any part of the book, you could have a complete plot twist that makes you go, wait, what? And you question everything you thought you knew. But yeah, this one, there were so many times where the people would be like talking about things they learned in class, and I was just like smiling and nodding like, alright, you're saying all this to me, it's making no sense, I'm understanding half what you're saying, but you seem smarter than me, so I'll trust you. And I think that is definitely an R.F. Kuang thing, and really maybe even a dark academia thing, but I think it's fun. You just have to be along for the ride. Okay, next off we have a subgenre that honestly is probably the one I read the least, just because it's not also very common, I'd say. In modern books, it was very much a thing maybe 5 or 10 years ago. In modern books, we didn't have that trope, and that is urban fantasy. So urban fantasy is when you have a fantasy vibe but in like a modern setting, in a city setting. So it's like if you're in Paris and there were magic people just going around Paris doing their business. That's what urban fantasy is. So yeah, most fantasy books prefer to create a completely new universe because it makes more sense. There's not kind of this disconnect of, wait, we're in Paris but there are magicians walking down the street making the Eiffel Tower dance. You know, that's kind of a mental disconnect. But yeah, so I only have 2 examples for this one because, like I said, I don't read a lot of urban fantasy books. I know a very big urban fantasy series that I am going to start this month, but I haven't yet, is the Shadowhunters. They are, I'd say, one of the biggest urban fantasy series, and I cannot wait to get to them. Seeing as I haven't read them, I can't talk about them in this video, but they are there, and they are apparently very good, and I'm reading them and I cannot wait. So the first book I'm going to talk about is These Violet Lights by Chloe Gong. This was like an OG book talk book, like people don't really talk about it anymore, but I know it was big a couple years back. And it is also a Romeo and Juliet inspired book, and it is set in 1920s Shanghai. Just those 2 facts immediately make me want to read it, but I'm going to give you guys a bit more. So basically in this we follow Juliet and Roma. You see the Romeo and Juliet inspiration already. They're from rival clans, and basically in Shanghai there's this thing, this monster that's attacking people, and it's attacking people from both clans. So they kind of join forces to try and figure out what the monster is and what they want and why they're killing people. This book series is amazing. It being a Romeo and Juliet retelling, the end does destroy you, but you kind of go into it knowing it is, because it doesn't hide the fact that it's Romeo and Juliet retelling. This is definitely YA, so for younger readers, but I think it holds up even as an older reader. I thought this was, again, quite different because, well, maybe it was only quite different to me because I don't read a lot of urban fantasy, but because it was set in real life and because it was set in Shanghai in the 1930s, it was just a different setting than a lot of books I read, and so I really enjoyed this. This next one is an urban fantasy, but the first book not so much. This is the first book in a trilogy, and book 1 isn't hugely urban, but it's more book 2 and 3 that are very much urban fantasies. So that is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. The reason I read this, literally the entire reason I read this, because I saw a TikTok where someone said this was basically a Drarry fanfic. Drarry, for those who don't know, is Draco and Harry from Harry Potter. I'm not a Drarry shipper at all, but that intrigued me, and so I picked it up and I absolutely loved it. This is now a trilogy that I really, really like. Basically in this you follow Simon, who is the chosen one, but his magic doesn't work properly, so he doesn't actually know why he's the chosen one, why they prophesied about him. And then he's roommates with Baz, who he thinks is secretly a vampire, but he can't prove it. It sounds really goofy, but it's really fun. But they're in a magical school. But then in book 2 and book 3 we expand out into the real world because they graduate school, and I especially liked book 2 and 3 to kind of ask that question of what happens after the chosen one fulfills the prophecy and has to live with what he's been through. What happens also after they graduate school. And so I just thought it was really well done, and it was really interesting. It's just different from what you normally read. Next up we have a genre that, despite its name, is for all ages, at least I personally think so, and that is YA fantasy. YA fantasy is really simple. It just means young adult. That's what the Y and the A are for, and really it kind of just means fantasy for younger readers, so probably between maybe 12 and 19 years old would kind of be the general ages of when young adult fantasy books are intended for. But I honestly think you can read them at all ages. I think you can be 50 years old and enjoying a YA fantasy book. They're just, sometimes the language will be a bit more simple, the terms will be a bit more like, you know, young people terms. They're not going to be complicated, they're easy to read. So I would say if you're looking to get into fantasy, like you don't want to start with anything too complicated, YA fantasy is the way to go, just because it's going to be written in a way that would be easier to understand if you're younger, and so therefore if it's a genre you're not familiar with, you will also find it easy to understand. So I do have 4 books in this category, so I will be talking about those for a while. The first one, and this one, okay, technically in bookstores this is in the 10 to 13 category, which is below YA. I think, having read some books that are in YA, like Powerless for example, I think the writing difficulty levels and the plot points are on the same level as Powerless. The only difference is Powerless maybe has some more mature scenes than these books. But aside from that, I would say they are exactly on the same scale. So I would qualify this personally as YA, but bookstores have it as 10 to 13. So do with that what you will. I read this book in November, so I was 20 years old, and I loved it. Had no problem with the characters being younger. But again, do with this what you will. And that is A School for Good and Evil. So this is book 2. I only have book 2 in physical. And basically in this book you have Sophie and Agatha who get taken from their little village and get put into the School for Good and Evil, which is where people train to become heroes. So heroes or villains. School for Good is where you train to become heroes or princesses, and the School for Evil is where you become a villain or like a witch or something like that. And so the principal is, yeah, very, you know, for children, and this is technically a children's book, but I just think it's entertaining enough, it's interesting enough a story that at 20 years old I still loved it. This is a 6-book series, I believe. The first 3 they're set during their time at school, and then the 3 after they graduate. And I would say the last 3 are also maybe slightly older based because the characters themselves are older. And even though in this they are supposed to be like 12, 13 years old, but it's kind of when you watch like Outer Banks and you're telling me these characters are supposed to be 16 years old, it's like, no they're not, they're visibly 25. That's kind of what it felt like reading this book, is you're telling me they're 13 years old, but in my mind they're like 16 to 18. Despite how it's advertised in bookstores, I do think you could read this at literally any age. These next 2 books were literally my formative teenage books. I would not be the reader I am today without them, and I think everyone should read them because I just think they're that good. So the first one is Raybearer. This one, criminally underrated. I have seen it maybe twice in the whole year I've been on TikTok. It's also so different from literally every single other book that I have ever read. So in this book, our main character, Parasai, gets chosen to be part of like the young prince's like friend group. So basically like a bunch of nobles all get picked and they get to be friends with the young prince, but then they're also his protectors, so they also get trained in combat and everything. So she gets chosen for them, but her aunt had actually been training her before she got chosen to kill the prince when she gets to a certain age, and she had to take a blood oath, and she was like a child, so she had no choice in this. She took a blood oath saying that she would kill the king, the prince, when he got to be that age. And this book is so much more than that. It is amazing. This is a duology. It's set in Africa, I believe, so it's also really different than any books. Well, kind of like a mythological Africa, not a real Africa, but an Africa-inspired country in a mythical world. The magic system in this is just so unique. Basically, the friend group of like the prince, when they all get to a certain age, the ones that are still there, they all get mind connected, so they can all like communicate throughout their mind, then they will have like specific categories of power that they have. This book is amazing, and I need to reread this because I haven't read this in like 7 years, and I need to reread it to like remember why I love it so much. And then of course we have, I feel like, one of the OG BookTok books, and that is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a fae YA fantasy. This is a political fantasy, so you could say it's high fantasy, I guess, and I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. This is the first book in a trilogy. You follow Jude, who as a child was taken into fairyland, or the world of fairy. I don't think it's called fairyland in this, I think it's just called fairy. Elfame. There we go, that's what it's called. The world is called Elfame. She gets taken into Elfame with her sister, and she becomes an assassin. Is that true? No, her dad's an assassin. I really could not tell you what happened in these books. I can just tell you that they are amazing. Jude Duarte is the #1 main female character. She is like the queen of female characters, and Cardan also love him equally as much, and the plot twist at the end of this book is crazy. So just read this series. I think this series can be read at all ages, even if it is supposed to be YA. Okay, so this next one was a recent read that I only read last month, and I'm pretty sure this is YA. It felt YA at least, and that is Girls Up and Dawn by Melissa Bashir Oust. So this was also, again, and I said this for almost all of them, very different than anything I've ever read. This is Persian-inspired fantasy, and we follow Soraya, who is the princess, but she was also cursed at birth to be poisonous to everyone she touches. So there's kind of that duality of she is the princess, but she's also kind of the bad guy, and she's seen as a monster. And this book kind of deals with the fact that inside of us we each have like a good and a bad, and sometimes the good wins and sometimes the bad wins. Like, you want to do good, but sometimes you have a tendency to do bad things in certain situations, or you can be led to do bad things. But it doesn't like moralize it, it just has it in the story. This is also a standalone, and I thought it was really good. I love it when we have a morally grey main character, and I really just like that this female main character was morally grey and that she was allowed to be angry, because most of the time the morally grey characters are the men, and so I absolutely loved that this turned that on its head. Okay, next up we have magical realism. So again, magical realism is one I'm not 100% sure specifically what it entails. Magical realism is essentially kind of what it sounds like. Again, a lot of these genre titles are really what they sound like. It's when you have, like, there is fantasy elements in the book, but the plot isn't necessarily fantasy based. Like, the story itself is a fairly normal storyline, like nothing too fantastical is in the plot points, but then there is a fantasy setting. So I have 2 books for this. I'm not 100% sure if these books fully fit in magical realism, but that's the category I would put them in. So you make your own decisions. The first one is Starling House by Alix E. Harrow, and really any Alix E. Harrow book I feel like fits into magical realism in that the main story isn't necessarily fantasy based, but there are fantasy elements in the story. This book, you follow Orphan, who is a high school dropout, and she has to take care of her brother because their parents are dead, and she gets a job at Starling House. And Starling House is kind of like a sentient house, and it's full of secrets, and over the course of the book, like, April discovers the secrets, falls in love with the house, realizes that actually her little town isn't that shitty after all, and falls for the main guy who owns the house. What's his name? Arthur. And there's also something to do with like a beast who at night haunts Starling House or something. And I only read this a year ago. I could not really tell you the specific plot points. There's a lot of things that like happen in the past impacting the future, and so like, yeah, there are fantasy elements because obviously the house is sentient and there is a little bit of magic, but the main plot, like if you took the magical out of the plot, it would change it a little, but you could still have a fairly similar story. Then we have The Book of Dust by Philip Pullman, but The Book of Dust is a spin-off series to The Golden Compass, and in these ones you follow Lyra as she basically goes hunting for a daemon. So in this universe, every person has a daemon, which is kind of like a physical apparition of their soul. So it's an animal and it's constantly with them. It can't be too far from them. It's like their soul but in the physical form. This is more an adventure novel than anything. She travels from like London to the Middle East in this book. Yeah, so the main story is like she's looking for Pantalaimon, but then she's also having to resolve this conflict that's going on because there's a shortage of rose oil in the world, and it's kind of linked to like this whole political and religious conflict that's going on in the Middle East, but also in Europe and in the UK. And it was a very interesting series. This is definitely an adult series. I would not recommend this if you were a beginner reader to fantasy or just books in general, because this is full on, this is heavy. As you can see from the size, there's a lot to it. Now we're on to my favorite subcategory, and that is interconnected series. I love me a good interconnected series. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just when you have, say, 3 duologies all set in the same world. The main characters in each duology is normally different, but then you have side characters that pop up here and there, and they're all set in the same world, in the same universe. So a very well-known one of these is The Six of Crows. So Six of Crows is in the Grishaverse. So you have the first trilogy, Shadow and Bone, Six of Crows, which is a duology, and I think it's called the King of Scars duology, which is the third one. I haven't actually read that one. So this is the second duology. So in this one, you follow the crows, who are there's 6 of them, obviously, and they pull off a heist. And so yeah, each book subcategory in this interconnected series is also different. So the first one is kind of your typical prophecy person, saving the world hero. They're a gang of thieves and they're trying to pull off a heist, they're trying to steal something, so that's different. And then the last one is more political because the main character is the prince of the country, I'm pretty sure, so it's a lot more political based. This series is honestly god tier. The little connected moments where you get a mention of the other character, that is what makes me love an interconnected series. Then we have one that is absolutely unknown. I've never seen a single one of these books mentioned once on BookTok. I don't really know if there's a name for the universe, but I just call it the Tortle universe because it's set in Tortle, which is the country. And so this one is the Lioness Quartet. No, the Song of the Lioness Quartet. So this is actually 4 books. They're not big books. So in this universe you have 3 book series of 4, 1 trilogy and 1 duology. Yeah, there we go. Is that 12? No. Is that 14? No. 17 books in this universe, and each of them amazing. Each of them have amazing main female characters, each of them have amazing storylines. So this is the first one. This follows Alana, who wants to become a knight, but obviously it was back in the day, women couldn't become a knight. So she switches places with her brother and she trains to become a knight. So the first 2 books are her knight training, and then the second 2 books is after she's become a knight and it's her like saving the kingdom. These books are amazing. I'm going to do a reread of them, but it's just the problem is there's so many of them, so it would take a while to do a reread. But I think it's actually a crime that these books are not known on BookTok. These books were my childhood. I have every single one of these books in physical because like every birthday, every Christmas, I went up to a bookstore, I wanted to buy one so I'd have the whole complete collection. They are honestly just so good. They are probably those book series that started my love for interconnected book series, I'm not gonna lie. So there you have it. We went through, where's my count? We went through 24 books today. I think that's a decent amount of book recs. I did pretty good. I hope you come out this video with some new book recs to add to your TBR, and also with just a general better understanding of the fantasy subgenres. There are a lot of them, and there are so many more that I also didn't talk about myself because either I don't read them or they're just not as common. But there are not endless fantasy subgenres, but there are a lot of them, and it can get confusing sometimes because some of them are really specific. These are kind of, I'd say, the main ones and the most popular ones, the ones you're most likely to find on like BookTok, people talking about and everything. We're at the end of this very long but hopefully useful video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoy watching this type of video, and seeing as we're at the end, I have no choice but to bid you adieu. And so have an absolutely lovely week. I will see you next Friday for our next video. Until then, bye.